Thank you for joining us for this live announcement of the New York Times 10 Best Books of 2022, presented by the editorial team of the Book Review. Please welcome Beth Weinstein, Executive Director of Event Programming at the New York Times.
Hi, everybody. My name is Beth Weinstein. We are so happy that you're here. Welcome to our online audience. This is the 4th annual 10 Best Books Award. And this is super exciting. In this room, in this virtual room as well, you will find out the 10 best books selected by our books team. This is where the story breaks before the list is even published. So we're so happy that you're here with us. Gilbert Cruz will be here to lead the conversation. Gilbert is the editor of the New York Times Book Review. Previously, he served as culture editor at the Times, in charge of arts and culture coverage, including the arts and leisure section printed on Sundays. So we're really happy that you're here. I can't wait for the reveal. Thank you.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here today. Thanks to all of you who are listening and watching online. We're recording this event to be an episode of our book review podcast, so do us a favor, don't yell out any stray remarks or profanity. I will try not to do the same. My name is Gilbert Cruz. I'm the editor of the New York Times Book Review, and we're here to present the top 10 books of 2022. I'm joined by several of our editors, as well as one of our staff critics, all of whom were part of the discussions and debates that went into choosing this list. So what is this list? What is it that we're trying to do with it, and why do we do it? Well, the way we think of it here at the Book Review is like this, I think at least, and you can feel free to disagree with me later. There are many thousands of books published every year. Anyone who goes to any Barnes & Noble or independent bookstore and looks at the front table every week would know this. We read a lot of them here. We read more than most, and I think honestly we read more than almost anyone out there over the course of a year. And all that time in the back of our minds, we're looking for gems. We're looking for the gems, the ones that dazzle, the ones that we cannot stop thinking about. We look for those books because we want to help you. We want to help the readers of the New York Times figure out what to read, what's important, what is nourishing, what is entertaining, what is, what's going to last. We also look for the best because it's part of our mission as a news organization, one that for 125 years has had this book review. We look for it because it's our job to document the state of this art form, the state of this medium. Ideally, we're noting the pinnacle of literary achievements, both for readers now, but also, and hopefully when we do it right, for readers way on down the line. The book review has long noted its best books of the year, but it was only in 2004 that we codified it as 10. I think in 2002, for example, it's like 7 books, which is a very random number. Typically now it's 5 fiction, 5 nonfiction, and if you look back, as I did, to that list from 2004, that first list of 10, I think you'll see we got it pretty right. We had Gilead by Marilynne Robinson, which is just an absolutely gorgeous novel. The Plot Against America by Philip Roth, which is sadly prescient, remains prescient in its own way. Alexander Hamilton by Ron Chernow, which obviously was later adapted into a musical theater juggernaut, and Chronicles Volume 1 by the later Nobel laureate and always odd Bob Dylan. It's one of the great music memoirs. The amazing thing, of course, is that these books are meaningful then and they're meaningful years later. I picked up Gilead off my shelf a few days ago and flipped through it. It'd been a while since I had read it, and I can tell you it still is great a book on faith and fatherhood and America now as it was then. If you haven't read Gilead, you should read it. I hope that 15 years from now, 10 years from now, someone will look at this year's top 10 best books list and feel as passionately about one of those titles as I do about Marilynne Robinson's. I've left the question of best until the end of this introduction because it's hard to answer. It's a sticky one. What does it mean to be the best? I think it means different things to different people. During all the discussions we had, I think I realized that sometimes it meant different things to different people in the room. But we work hard to choose these books. Our deputy editor, Tina Jordan, in a moment is going to explain how we do that, just so you know. But broadly, we look at the prose, the writing, the language. Is it graceful or sophisticated or clever? Does the book have narrative drive, regardless of whether it is fiction or nonfiction? If it is nonfiction, is there new scholarship? Is the argument convincing or new or revelatory? Does it teach us? Does the book move us? Does it set our brain on fire? There's likely no book that can do all the things that I listed, but these 10 do many of them. We here at the Book Review love books, and you likely wouldn't be here or watching online or listening later to this podcast if you didn't love books as well. We hope that you find something memorable in this list of 10. Thank you again for listening in today. I'd like to now introduce the aforementioned Tina Jordan, one of our deputy editors at the Book Review, who's going to explain how it is that we actually choose these 10. Thank you very much. Tina.
Hi, everyone. I'd like to pull the curtain back a little bit and walk you through our process and tell you just how we end up with the top 10 list every year. It's actually not as mysterious as people seem to think. It all starts with a Google Doc. As my colleagues on the Book Review read books they love, they begin adding titles to a shared Google Doc. And then sometime, not January, but the beginning of the year, we have our first Best Books meeting. And editors talk about the books they've added to the list, why they've added them. They talk often very passionately about what they think makes this particular book a possible year-end contender. Keep in mind, at that point, they're usually the only person on the desk who's read the book in question. So following that first meeting, we call in copies, physical copies, galleys, PDFs, what have you, of the books in question, and my colleagues start reading them. I know that it sounds like a cushy gig, reading books for a living, but let me just say this is a tremendous amount of reading, and it's on top of all the reading editors are already doing for their day job, assigning and editing reviews. It's also not a matter of really just reading the first chapter or two, because to properly judge a book, you need to read the whole thing or close to it. And while that's easy enough to do if you're talking a 100-page novella, I will point out that on last year's list, there was a 900-page biography. So serious time involved. All right, so everyone is reading. Some people actually listen to the book on tape, which is a different way to read the book. So everyone's reading, and then at our next meeting, we begin debating the books in question. And when I say debate, I mean it. Our conversation can get pretty lively. It's, this year alone, we debated things like, if a short story collection is to be on the list, does that mean every single story in the book has to be exemplary? And we also had a lively discussion about newly translated books. Could we consider books published a long time ago that have new, vibrant translations? So we're always talking about things like that. And people are constantly adding books to the list. Books are coming off. Our meeting frequency increases as the year goes on. At first we're, meeting once a month, then it's twice a month. And then for the last few months, we're meeting every week. We slowly begin to whittle down the number of books on the list. I'd say maybe mid-September, we have an initial vote to see where things stand, to trim the list a bit. And then we hold another final vote a few weeks later. Sometimes there's a tie-break vote too. I believe this year we had a third vote. I want to be absolutely clear. We do not curate the list. We don't look at it and say, oh no, there can't be 2 memoirs on the list, or 3 short story collections, or 2 science fiction novels. You only have to take a look at previous top 10 lists to see that this is true. There's one in the not too distant past where, in fact, 3 of the 5 fiction titles were short story collections. We don't pay attention to who an author is. Famous, not famous, doesn't matter. We don't care about an author or a book's political bent. So I just want to stress that the list is the list is the list. The books that we think, as Gilbert said, are the most compellingly told, the freshest, the most original, the ones that are importantly good, the ones that are going to stand the test of time. And one final note, it really is a year-long process. By the time we wrap 1 year, we're beginning work on the next. We already have that 2023 Google Doc.
Thank you, Tina, for explaining that. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, our editors at the Book Review are often reading months in advance. So I think we have in our galley closet right now books that are coming out in February, March, April. So January is when it all begins. Thanks for explaining how it works. We're going to jump to the list now. I'm going to go person by person here as they talk about their books and let you know what their name is and who they are. We're going to go nonfiction, fiction, nonfiction, fiction until we reach 10. So our first book on our list of top 10 books of 2022 is An Immense World by Ed Yong. And here to talk about it is our nonfiction critic here at the New York Times, Jennifer Salai.
Thanks, Gilbert. So this is a book that asks a lot of us as readers, and it's not because it's particularly dense or filled with joy to read, but it asks a lot of us because what it does is it asks us as humans, as readers, to step outside what he calls our sensory bubble, to try to experience the world in a completely different way. And so to put it briefly, this is a book about non-human animals and how they experience the world through their own sensory apparatuses. And their senses are often very different from ours. And so there are books about animals that are all about how animals relate to us as humans, whereas this is really a book about animals, as they don't relate to us. And so as you can imagine, this is the kind of book that contains a lot of fun, weird, surprising animal facts. So, of course, anybody who has pets knows that dogs have a very keen sense of smell, or that cats use their whiskers to sense, the sort of slightest vibrations of the air around them. But at the same time, he introduces us to animal senses that might be new to a lot of readers. So, for example, sea turtles have a sense of the Earth's magnetic fields, so they can make these huge migrations across lifetimes, across enormous distances. And dolphins can echolocate in the water, so they can use their sense of sound and vibration in order to sense not just the shapes of things, but also even the shapes inside of other shapes. So if there's a human in the water, they can sense not only the outline of the human, but also their skeleton, what that skeleton actually looks like. And so they have essentially X-ray vision. But I should also say, when I say that they have X-ray vision, that term itself is misleading. And the reason I use it is because as humans, we are relentlessly, incessantly visual. There's only a few birds of prey who have better vision in the daytime at a distance than humans do. And so if you think about the metaphors that we as humans use, X-ray vision, something is illuminating or lucid, that we use those metaphors because they appeal to the sense that we use so often. And so we like light because it caters to our own sensory bubble. And one of the things that Ed Yong points out is that we have essentially created a world in the context of what we ourselves as humans want, but we have also, at the same time, made it less hospitable to other species. So, for instance, light pollution is something that he talks about a lot, because while it's very nice to have the nighttime illuminated for us, it's very unpleasant for a lot of animals, and not just unpleasant, but totally scrambles their senses and makes it very hard for them even to live. And so what he says at the end is that none of this is inevitable, that we have another sense as humans that he encourages us to use, which is our sense of imagination. And so the first word in this book is actually imagine. He wants us to imagine what the world is experienced, how the world is experienced by creatures that are very different from ourselves. And so that is an extraordinary sense, the sense of imagination, but it shouldn't make us feel arrogant. And one of the things I really appreciated about this book is how small I felt reading it, that this is a book that really counsels humility. And I was completely bowled over by the end of the book. And it really changed the way that I think, experience the world.
Thank you. Thank you, Jen. I remember going when I was a kid to the planetarium for the first time and seeing the stars in a way that I'd never seen before, because I grew up in New York City, and feeling that sense of smallness for the first time. It's amazing to think. I've only read a little bit of An Immense World, that there's a book that can do something like that as well. Thanks for talking about that one. We're going to go to our next book. It is our first fiction book on the list, and that book is Trust by Hernan Diaz. And one of our preview editors, Dave Kim, is going to talk about this one.
Thanks, Gilbert. Trust is a novel about an American family's rise to fortune and the secrets it harbored along the way. And at its core, it's a pretty simple story, but the telling of that story is really anything but simple, as I'll explain in just a second. I first want to set the scene a little bit for you. We're in New York. It's like the turn of the 20th century. In the world of finance, it's like the Wild West. Speculation is rampant. Fortunes are being made. The country's expanding. Opportunities are everywhere. But financial panics are also alarmingly common, and wealth can be destroyed as soon as it's built. And into all this, there's a hotshot young financier who comes in and just starts making a killing in the market, cleans house, and trading stocks and shorting the market. And there's his wife, who is a brilliant but slightly eccentric woman who becomes as vital a force to the city's cultural life as the husband does to the world of finance. And so the book begins like something out of Henry James or Edith Wharton. It's a society novel, social circles colliding and sort of creating these mini crises. And then it's kind of turns into a much more psychological novel as the wife starts to develop mental illness and the dynamics of their relationship change. So all this is laid out in the first part of four distinct, very distinct, I guess, books within the book. And each of the three that come after it will drastically alter the facts of the narrative from three different perspectives. We end up with getting the financier himself, one of his assistants, and finally his wife, whose diary makes up the fourth and final section. And I won't get too much into the details of that, because I think part of the pleasure of this book is in the retracing and the sense of discovery that we get all along the way. The whole thing amounts to a story of greed, of power, of American opportunism, but also, the workings behind the smoke and mirrors of capitalism, the hidden labors behind the so-called great men of the past. These are people who manipulated the market, sure, and sort of made fictions out of numbers and money, but also manipulated history and obscured key people and inconvenient truths. So I think the form of this novel just becomes so essential to its telling, with all of these competing narratives, trying to correct the record and just sort of illuminate, shine the spotlight in the right place. This is Hernan Diaz's second novel. He's also a scholar of literature, a professor, and I think that really shows in his command of styles and homages. I mentioned Henry James and Edith Wharton, but you might also find shades of Thomas Mann and Upton Sinclair, even to the literary modernists. But you don't really need any of that to enjoy the novel. I think it's a book that works for many different types of readers. Folks who love experimentation, of course, and pastiche, but also, just people who love a good old-fashioned historical yarn. So it's just a pleasure to include it on the list this year.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Next book on our list is a nonfiction book. It is a memoir, and that memoir is called Stay True by Wasu. And an editor on our desk, and our poetry editor, Greg Coles, is going to talk about this one.
Stay True is a memoir of an unlikely but formative college friendship between the author, who grew up in the Bay Area as the son of Taiwanese immigrants, and his Berkeley classmate, Ken, who grew up in the San Diego suburbs as like third or fourth generation Japanese American. And on the surface, these young men could not be more different. Wasu is an introvert. He is passionate about his kind of independent artistic tastes. He likes indie music. He gets very involved in Berkeley's zine culture, clipping things and making his own indie magazines. And Ken, he dismisses Ken on first sight as kind of the representation of everything that he detests in mainstream culture. The clothes that he wears, the music that he listens to, his confidence. He belongs to a fraternity. He's extroverted and charming. And Wasu just reacts badly to all of that. But they're thrown together again and again at parties in their dorm. And as they talk, there's something, there's a depth to Ken that brings them together. They're in the same friend circle. And he realizes that in many ways, Ken is equally as thoughtful as he is himself. He's more politically engaged, involved in terms of Asian American identity. Wasu and Ken are both Asian Americans, but their relationship to the culture is very different because of their family backgrounds, because Asia is an enormous continent. So they're coming at it from different places, but are drawn to each other partly as a result of that. But it's very much a book about artistic consciousness, and foremost, it's an elegy and a tribute, because we learn. It almost feels like a spoiler to say this, except that the book says so right on the jacket. So I will tell you that Ken dies while they're still at Berkeley as the result of a carjacking. He's murdered in a carjacking, and so this it locks the friendship into place and makes it that much more formative that Wasu keeps looking back at this. The book opens not in college. The book opens in Wasu's family, and you get a very touching portrait of his relationship with his parents. His father is often back in Taiwan, and they have this charming fax correspondence. It's set in the mid-90s, and so you get, again, zine culture, the faxing, a lot of the culture as it was in the mid-90s before the internet arrived and changed everything. And so it's a portrait of a very particular place and a very particular time. And it sets the ground for who Wasu is when he comes into college. But then it moves into this description of this friendship, driving around aimlessly, listening to music, making mixtapes, fixing on movies. Ken is obsessed with the cult movie The Last Dragon, and the two friends decide to make their own movie, kind of riffing on The Last Dragon. And after the carjacking and after Ken dies, Wasu is tormented by this. He's tapped to deliver the eulogy at the funeral, and it goes into years of therapy, kind of trying to come to terms with the friendship, with the death, with what he sees as his own role. You know, could I have changed things if I had played things differently at the party they were at right before the carjacking? And this book then becomes a working through of all of these questions, even as it celebrates the friendship. It's not a long book, but it encompasses a huge amount, and it is very clear and thoughtful. It moves methodically. He's a terrific writer. Wasu is a staff writer at The New Yorker, and he teaches literature at Bard. I wondered, I lived in the Bay Area in the mid-90s myself, and so I wondered if I was responding to it just at the personal level. But it's a book that I finished and immediately bought copies for my 2 college-age children, and my daughter has read it and she loved it. My son is holding it in reserve. And so it's a book that I can recommend not just to people my age who lived through that time and that place, but to anyone. You know, I'm happy to have it on the list.
Thank you, Greg. So am I. I mean, it's an amazing reminder of how tactile culture used to be. I'm sure some people here think about this all the time, but the way you would, you know, you would burn a CD for your friend as opposed to sending them a playlist. You would have to, you know, catch a TV show at the very time that it was airing or record it on your VHS. I too grew up watching The Last Dragon with my brother. It was a lot. I related to a lot in it, but I also related to the things I feel like that I had nothing in common with Hua about. It's a wonderful book. Thank you for speaking about it. Our next book is The Candy House by Jennifer Egan. And here to talk about it is the newest preview editor on the desk, Sadie Stein.
Thank you for having me. Jennifer Egan is a name that will be familiar to many of you because her 2010 Pulitzer-winning Visit from the Goon Squad can accurately be called an epoch-defining book. And if you love that book, The Candy House is technically a sequel, and you'll be glad to know that you're reunited with the same cast of quirky, tormented New Yorkers, her slightly skewed but very familiar New York City, and of course her endlessly inventive mind. However, The Candy House can and should be appreciated on its own merits and is very much its own book. 10 years have changed us, have changed New York, of course, and obviously have changed the writer. And this is, as the title, which is kind of Brothers Grimm meets Candy Crush, implies, very much of the moment, yet timeless, and menacing but cozy at the same time. Now, the basic premise is that one of the characters, and I won't give away either the first or the second book completely, but let's just say has become one of those, as she puts it, tech demigods with whom we're all on a first-name basis, and has become very, very rich by investing in a technology called Own Your Unconscious, in which basically people can trade in the stock and currency of their memories and everyone else's, unfiltered. And this is as troubling, as addictive, and as creepily familiar and plausible as you might imagine. However, it's not just about this sci-fi dystopian premise, as great as the premise is. That would be enough. It's a very human story. It's about people, it's about friendships, and it's very much about the world we live in which our lives are in some ways driven and informed, but in other ways responsive to technologies, but also in which those are reflections, essentially, of our humanity. Egan is always tremendously inventive in her prose, and she uses a multitude of media. Lovers of literary fiction will find a lot to be excited about. It's a palpably intelligent book. If you like good literary fiction, it's for you. If you like science fiction, it's for you. If you like philosophy, it's for you. But most of all, this is a deeply pleasurable and thought-provoking read, which you can read for fun, but which will leave you thinking and wrestling afterwards in ways you both want and don't want. And in that way, the title is so apt because it tastes delicious. It may rot your brain teeth just a little bit down the line. As one person described it to me after reading it, it is an ultimately optimistic dystopia. And I think we can all use that right now.
Excellent. Thank you, Sadie. I loved The Candy House. I was put off. I wasn't going to read it because I did not want to have to go back and reread A Visit from the Goon Squad because there's too much to read. I didn't want to go back and reread one, but I dove right in, and I just could not. To use the great book cliche, I could not put it down. I'm glad you presented this book, Sadie. Our next book is a piece of nonfiction, and that is Strangers to Ourselves by Rachel Aviv. And here to talk about it is our wonderful editor, Emily Aiken.
Hi. So you may know Rachel Aviv's work from The New Yorker, where she is also a staff writer. I just realized we have two on the list this year. She tends to write about unconventional people, people whose behavior falls outside societal norms. And in that respect, her book, Strangers to Ourselves, her first book, is no exception. Here she tells us the stories of 5 very different people from very different times and places, all of whom have been diagnosed with mental illness. She's really interested in this book in showing us the ways in which psychiatry can profoundly shape a person's life through its labels and textbook definitions and descriptions. It can alter the path of a life, and not always in ways that are positive, she suggests. Even the term mental illness, she implies, is problematic. At the same time, she's really interested in showing us what psychiatry may miss, the aspects of our individual uniqueness, experiences and facets of identity that it simply fails to capture. In one chapter, we meet an Indian woman who is trapped in an unhappy marriage and increasingly drawn to a life of mysticism and prayer. She leaves her family for long stretches, living for a while at a monastery and eventually on the street outside a temple. She is given a diagnosis of schizophrenia, which she rejects. And without ever passing judgment on the diagnosis, Aviv in this chapter is at pains to show us how psychiatry, a field developed mainly in the West, simply can't account for this woman's spiritual impulses in the context of her own culture. They're considered merely irrational, further proof of her madness. Similarly, in another chapter about a Black woman who has a psychotic disorder and who has been convicted of murder, she considers how psychiatry, again, a field developed and practiced mainly by white people, may simply miss the ways in which race and racism can profoundly and devastatingly affect a person, a patient. Throughout the book, her approach is one of great empathy and sensitivity. She listens without judging. She exposes the complications and contradictions in moral and legal reasoning, but she never tries to resolve them. Her book is philosophical, not prescriptive, and it's also deeply personal. She too was diagnosed with a mental illness, she tells us, at the age of 6. Her parents had gone through a difficult divorce, and she had stopped eating. She was hospitalized and given a diagnosis of anorexia. She may have been the youngest person in the country at that time with that diagnosis, she tells us. Happily, she recovered quickly, but a girl she met at the hospital, a 12-year-old, did not, and went on to grapple with this disease for many, many years. And Aviv is fascinated by that divergence. How is it, she wonders, that she recovered, but this other girl didn't? Psychiatry tells us a story about ourselves, she writes, and that story may save us or it may trap us. Ultimately, her book is a searching and eloquent meditation on that conundrum.
Thank you very much, Emily. I guess this is the second New Yorker writer we have on our list. They have good writers over there. I don't know what to say. Yeah, they sure do. Our next book is Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. And here to talk about that book is our editor, Elizabeth Egan.
For the record, I am not related to Jennifer Egan. I hail from the lesser Egans. You might already know Barbara Kingsolver from her previous 9 novels, 3 books of nonfiction, 2 essay collections, and 2 books of poetry. She's been around for a long time. Her books don't follow a pattern or a type. Each one has the vibe of a passion project, a rabbit hole excavated, or an opinion aired. 34 years ago, in an interview about her debut novel, The Bean Trees, Kingsolver told a Times reporter, "Every character in The Bean Trees is a piece of me. I don't know how people write about characters they don't know and don't care about." That commitment to knowing and to caring is on full display, now enhanced by a seasoned writer's wisdom and scope in her 10th novel, Demon Copperhead. It takes guts to attempt a modern retelling of David Copperfield, but Kingsolver sticks the landing with the panache of Mary Lou Retton. I'm really dating myself with that reference. We meet Damon Fields, a redheaded troublemaker born in the 1980s in Appalachia, the only son of a young drug-addicted mother. By the time Demon, as he's known, finishes grade school, his mom has overdosed. He becomes a ward of the state, bouncing from one foster home to another, each more Dickensian than the last. By the end of high school, Demon is an addict himself, having been prescribed opioids for a knee injury that ends his brief turn as a high school football star. Across decades, across state lines, through almost 600 pages to hell and back, Kingsolver traces Demon's search for safety and belonging, peace and health, connection and creativity. She gives us an honest, often brutal look at the opioid epidemic and the cycle of poverty and the relentless greed fueling each one. There is no bottom to this rabbit hole. It's ongoing, especially in the small towns Kingsolver writes about, which aren't far from the one where she grew up. But Demon Copperhead isn't depressing or maudlin. This is an ambitious, sprawling yarn based on careful research, lit up with loyalty, humor, and a realistic kind of hope. It's clear from the first page that Barbara Kingsolver is an author at the top of her career, that she still cares deeply about her characters and telling their story in a way that is not just entertaining, but also respectful. She begins with an epigraph from David Copperfield. "It's in vain to recall the past unless it works some influence on the present." She ends with this line in the acknowledgments. "For the kids who wake up hungry in those dark places every day, who've lost their families to poverty and pain pills, whose caseworkers keep losing their files, who feel invisible or wish they were, this book is for you."
Thank you so much, Liz.
You're welcome.
That was wonderful. We are going to go to a pre-taped explanation of our next book. We desperately wanted our editor, Lauren Christensen, to talk about this one. She could not be here today, but she is going to tell you why Under the Skin by Linda Villarosa deserves to be one of the top 10 books of 2022.
Under the Skin is a book about racism in the American healthcare system. A health journalist, Linda Villarosa herself, used to believe in the very widely held myth that Black and brown Americans are less healthy than their white counterparts because of behavior. So things like lower incomes and poor socioeconomic status and education and food deserts and things like that. This book is a very powerful argument against that myth. Instead, through a very wide-ranging look at specific corners of the healthcare system, Villarosa mounts the thesis that Black Americans are less healthy than white Americans because American institutions have either allowed them or in some cases forced them to be. The scope of this book is as broad as it is essential, but Villarosa hones it for us by giving medical injustice a really human face. So she will go very in depth into historical examples like that of the 12 and 14-year-old sisters who were forcibly sterilized without their parents' consent or without their consent in the 1970s, to more recent examples like whole communities who were completely decimated by toxic wastewater, which caused brain tumors because these chemical plants were specifically located in communities that were not white. And then my personal favorite chapter is the one that follows a Black woman who was about to give birth, and it follows her obstetrical care and how the mishandling of that care led to her near death and the death of her infant. All of this research, all of this reporting, Villarosa conveys with just the precision of an ethnographer and also with just so much heart. This book is infuriating at times and so beautifully done. And it is a very fundamental book about kind of the integrity of the American body. I really recommend this.
Thank you, Lauren. I hope you're listening right now, although I could not watch myself talk, so if you took a break, that's fine. We wish you were here with us. Thank you for talking about Under the Skin. Our next book is If Wasu Stay True was in part about grief, this next book is almost entirely about grief. It is called The Furrows, and it is by Namwali Serpell. Here to talk about it is our editor, M.J. Franklin.
Hi. I'm so excited to talk about this book because it is brilliant and moving. It defies description, but the thing I can say with 100% certainty is that it is a book that you have to read. The Furrows is a grief novel. It opens with a tragedy. A young girl, C, is at the beach with her brother. Her brother swims out into the ocean and gets drawn in. C tries to save him. She gets his body, she's swimming back. She feels like something happens. She makes it back to shore, but then she blacks out. When she wakes again, her brother's body is gone, and she is being herself rescued by another man who has found them. They go back home, they tell their parents, and everyone's torn. What happened to the brother? Where did he go? C is certain that he died. Her mom is not so certain. And the book is a little bit about how their family is torn apart by that uncertainty. As she grows up, she starts seeing repeated encounters with this man who has her brother's name, and then a calamity happens. That's the start. Then a flashback. You're with the brother again. There's another tragedy. The brother disappears, dies, you don't know, in a different way. You have another run-in with this man. Then another flashback, another scene with the brother. He is injured, killed, disappeared, and yet another way. That's just the first half of the novel. The second half pivots to another character. See, it does defy description. What I found so remarkable about this book, I think what we all found so remarkable about this book, is the way that it enacts the feeling of grief. The book actually opens with a line, I don't want to tell you what happened, I want to tell you what it felt like. And the book succeeds at that remarkably. It is when you get narrative shifts as the book morphs and changes, it is consuming, it is jolting, it is confusing, but in a very rich way. Namwali Serpell really shakes readers out of their comfort zone so that they can see, so they can explore, so that they can think. And it's in a way that is so unique, so singular. You might recognize Namwali Serpell from her first book, The Old Drift, which was a notable book in 2019. And I think in that same way, in a different format, she has shaken readers outside of their comfort zone. Namwali is also a brilliant critic and a brilliant thinker, and she's able to translate that all into this novel. I hope this doesn't make the novel sound like it is detached and cerebral and overly technical, because it's not. Within this book, there is a moving, intimate look at what it means to experience loss and recover from it, or not recover from it. There's this beautiful examination of race, of family, and what happens when we grow up in the face of tremendous grief. I'm so excited that this is on this list. Again, it is a must read. So I'm excited to celebrate this. But also, one thing I know for certain is that Namwali Serpell is a writer to watch. Anything that she writes, I'm excited to pick up next.
Thank you so much, MJ. This is a book that sounds heavy, perhaps, because it is about grief, but it's also a book. One of the things I talked about before, when we think about what makes a best book, is the writing and the prose, and I think the writing and the prose in this book is beautiful and gorgeous and sometimes overwhelming. It's impressive to imagine that there are people out there who can do things with the English language, but she is one of them. Thank you for speaking about that book. We have two more. Our next book is a piece of nonfiction. It is called We Don't Know Ourselves, and it is by the author Fintan O'Toole. Here to talk about it is Sadie Stein.
I'm so excited to talk about this book, which was, in fact, the first book I read in this job, and one that stayed with me and obviously resonated with other people here. Now, O'Toole is a wonderful, accomplished critic and historian, essayist. If you know his work, you know how great he is. He said he was not interesting enough to merit his own memoir. And so instead, he would write a personal history of modern Ireland. And the book is as unconventional, as sly, as quietly authoritative, and as stealth rigorous as that implies. It manages to be both one of the most compelling and incisive histories of the past 6 decades of Irish history that I can remember reading, and a terrific memoir of O'Toole and his family. He plots his own life, born in 1958, against the rapid changes in the country from what he calls an irrelevant, very religious country with very low birth rates and a lot of emigration to what we now know it to be, a vibrant country which has tremendous cultural capital and had the Celtic Tiger, has become much more progressive, all of which happened in a shockingly short period of time. All of this is juxtaposed against events from O'Toole's own life when he goes to university to study the Irish language and suddenly hears Nashville sound playing in every music hall in West Cork. Changes within his intentions within his own family, dealings with lifestyle changes, sexual mores changing. You could read it merely as a memoir and have one of the best reading experiences of the year, I think. He's hilarious. I hate to fall into cliche, which he would never do, but he's got such a way with words. It's an absolute pleasure to read, but it's a complete education as well. And there's a famous rye bread slogan from the 70s and 60s here in New York, which many of you may know. You don't need to be Jewish to love Levy's rye bread. You certainly do not need to be Irish to enjoy Fintan O'Toole's very personal history of modern Ireland. I think everyone would, and I encourage you to pick it up. And it's exciting to me that this is a book that you might not have heard about unless you'd had the ill fortune to dine with me in the past 12 months. And I hope a lot of people will read it and enjoy it as much as we all did.
Wonderful. What a great endorsement that was. Thank you very much, Sadie. We are down to our last book, and here to talk about it is Emily Aiken. Sorry. It is a book called Checkout 19 by Claire Louise Bennett.
Okay, let's see if we can go out with a bang. Bennett is a young British writer whose previous collection of stories was called Pond. It brought her admiring reviews and a bit of a following. Checkout 19 is her first novel. It's not a conventional novel in the sense that it is not heavily plotted, or really the plot isn't the point, nor does it have a cast of characters per se. The novel unfolds almost entirely within the mind of the narrator, a young working-class British woman, unnamed, an aspiring writer. And what a mind she has. The novel begins, as many writers' stories do, at the library, where the narrator recalls being taken as a child and checking out armloads of books, but being unable to focus on a single one because she's so curious to know what's in all the others. And in essence, the book is an ode to language, to literature, to books, to the imagination. We follow the narrator through scenes from her school days, her college years, a job at the supermarket, which is where the title of the book comes from, and relationships with various men, mostly unsatisfying, and through a kind of feminist awakening, again, through literature. We also inhabit fictional worlds that the narrator has created, fragments or parts of stories that she's written or longs to write. But these events, in my view, don't really account for the great pleasure of this novel. I think its real appeal is its voice, a singular, often hilarious, but always extremely literary voice. Bennett just loves language. In her hands, words seem to be almost alive. They have a kind of physical dimension. Within a single sentence, a description of a whisk, the kitchen implement, is associated with meringue, souffle, spoondrift, froth, lather, spume, bubbles, balloons, and finally, in a kind of virtuosic riff, ballerinas catapulting skyward in ethereal pirouettes. Her prose has a looping, incantatory quality. She kind of peppers sentences with little rhetorical expressions like, yes, that's right, which have the effect, well, it's kind of like listening to someone think out loud. And for that reason, I also recommend listening to the book, the audiobook version. Bennett reads it herself. It's quite wonderful. And finally, I'll just say that I think that this book is more than an exercise in style. Toward the end, life intrudes on the narrator's very literary existence in a brutal and unexpected way, which gives the book a kind of moral gravitas. What does it mean to experience the world primarily as story, she's forced to ask? What does it mean to conceive of the world as metaphor and symbol or portent? Is that okay? What do we miss? What do we gain?
Thank you so much. So those are 10 books. I am going to recap them for those of you who weren't taking notes. I'll start with nonfiction. Our 5 nonfiction books on the 10 best books list of 2022 are An Immense World by Ed Yong, Stay True by Wasu, Strangers to Ourselves by Rachel Aviv, Under the Skin by Linda Villarosa, and We Don't Know Ourselves by Fintan O'Toole. The 5 fiction books on our list are Trust by Hernan Diaz, The Candy House by Jennifer Egan, Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver, The Furrows by Namwali Serpell, and Checkout 19 by Claire Louise Bennett. Thank you very much to all the editors on stage for talking about these 10 wonderful books. We have a few minutes left, and what we like to do usually at these events is talk about the books that we love that did not make the list, the books that got away. We don't have much time, so I'm going to ask everyone to just be as short but impactful as possible. I'm going to start with Dave Kim, actually. I know I'm changing it up here, but I'm going to start with Dave Kim, who's going to tell us about 2 books that just came out.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk about Cormac McCarthy, who is 89 and can still rip. And he came this year out of the clouds like Moses with these like 2 tablets to bestow them on us, and we can puzzle over them for years to come. They're a pair of interlinked novels about 2 siblings in the 1970s and the 1980s. One is a salvage diver who also happens to be a math and physics genius. He's going on assignment in the Gulf to a plane crash. He sees that one of the passengers, one of the bodies, is missing. And this turns out to be a key bit of information that haunts him throughout the book. People are after him. It's not clear who, government agents perhaps. And then the other sibling is Alicia, who is also a math genius, but is schizophrenic and is visited by her imaginary friends. And we get this narrative of her hallucinations. The second book is entirely devoted to her, and that's about her therapy sessions with her shrink. And both books have a kind of dreamy quality to them. They're vibrant, but they're also full of digressions and just funny exchanges, endlessly strange passages, and you get the sort of full range of McCarthy's idiosyncrasies, his very spare, stripped down writing, as well as his just beautifully Baroque descriptions. They're books about, plumbing the depths of the unknown, of human knowledge, of the sort of edge of human knowledge, the dark sides of science, but also the depths of grief and human emotion, things that make us do inexplicable things. I found them great and just strange in the best of ways.
Wonderful. I'm hoping to read both of those over the holidays. We asked our wonderful editor, who is not here, Lauren Christensen, to record one more segment for us to talk about a book that she loved that did not make the list, but that she wanted to stump for. So hopefully we can hear from her again.
On the surface, Gabrielle Zevin's Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow is a novel about video games. Sam Mazer and Sadie Green are around 11 years old when they meet at a children's hospital where they're there for their various very sad reasons, and they are in a sort of children's rec room, and they bond over playing Super Mario Brothers. Fast forward to their kind of early adulthood, they move on to Harvard and MIT respectively, where there's these kind of blossoming, precocious geniuses, and when they reconnect, as young adults, they decide to put their heads together and make a video game. I think what impressed me so much about this book was its sort of sheer storytelling. It pulls you along on their journey from childhood into adulthood, not many other books have for me. But I think there's also this incredible interweaving of the real and the virtual worlds that I think is such an important message for us. And finally, I think that there's something really special about the relationship between Sam and Sadie, which, Sadie describes later on. She's like, we're not, so much lovers as we are collaborators. And it's just this very meaningful, intellectual and imaginative relationship that they have that is totally unconventional and unlike any love story I can really think of. So this book is definitely for people who both are and are not video game aficionados. This is just a book about kind of the human experience. It's about friendship and it's about love, and it has a lot to teach us about mortality as well. It's absolutely beautiful.
Thank you again, Lauren, wherever you are. I think we only have time for one more, but there's the wonderful thing. If you listen to the New York Times Book Review podcast in coming weeks, I'm going to try to get all of these people in a room, maybe not together because the room's not that big, but to talk about some more books that they really love this year that were not on the top 10 list. So I think I will go right now to Greg Coles, who, yeah, you didn't know where I was going to go, but you're on the spot.
I feel like I won or lost.
Who's going to talk about Avalon by Nell Zink?
I'm here to talk about Avalon by Nell Zink. It's a novel. Zink has been fairly prolific in a fairly short amount of time. This is a novel that shares some traits with books that did make our list, like Stay True, like Demon Copperhead, like Checkout 19. It's a book about the formation of an artistic conscience. Also, like Demon Copperhead, it tells a very Dickensian tale about a young woman, in this case, who is essentially orphaned and raised in a step family, who puts her to work almost in indentured servitude on the family nursery in Southern California. And it develops into a will they or won't they romance between a friend of hers, somebody who keeps coming in and out of her life. And it's about her abject poverty and the way that she overcomes it. It's a novel that moves at a headlong pace. You're not always sure what's coming next. Zink feels a little unruly as a writer in a way that's really exciting to read. She just kind of throws things and sees what sticks, and carries you right along with her while she's doing that. So that's a book that that I greatly enjoyed this year.
Thank you, Greg. I'm going to end with you.
Me?
Yes, you are going to talk about the book that you loved, that you wished had made it onto the list, perhaps.
Wow, a morning of surprises, of highs, lows, no lows, only highs.
Only highs.
The book that I wanted to shout out and talk about is If I Survive You by Jonathan Escoffery. It is a collection of linked stories about a Jamaican immigrant family living in Miami. It is so searing, it is so smart that you forget that it's actually a debut. For the sake of time, I won't tell you all about every single story, but what I will tell you is that what Jonathan Escoffery does so spectacularly well is put his characters in this moral quagmire as they are trying to get by. And you get to see and experience with these characters the ethical decisions they have to make, the trade-offs they have to make, how these characters are trying to both find themselves in this new place, they're longing for home. What does home even mean? All of these things in this family that's both expanding and contracting in how it feels for each other. They want to hold each other close, but at the same time, there's constant fighting. Similarly, for the characters trying to survive, they're trying to get by, and yet they feel conflicted about some of the things they have to do. And you can see Jonathan on the page watching his characters think and watching those characters watch other characters watch them. It's this very complicated moral, intellectual back and forth happening in the middle of these just really electric short stories. And so that is If I Survive You by Jonathan Escoffery. Thank you for...
Only highs.
Only highs. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, MJ. And thank you to the many people watching and listening at this moment. Thank you to everyone here in person. Those were the top 10 books of 2022. It's good to have you all here with us. Have a wonderful day.